Welcome to another episode of Stewart Squared. We're doing a little experiment where we're going to try on spaces at the same time as we're streaming to all these different places and recording it for our listeners on Spotify and YouTube. And please go and go find us on YouTube and Spotify. So last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, we
If I understand it, they can find us on X/Twitter.
Yes,
doing this.
they can. Yeah, where there's a spaces. So we're on a spaces called Atari and building computers in the 70s, but mostly as an experiment to see whether it works when both streaming to Riverside and streaming to Twitter. So we'll see whether it works. But 2 weeks ago, we had Nolan Bushnell on the show from Atari. Really interesting because he was one of the only other people besides Stewart Brand, who I understand is the connection between 1968 Summer of Love and the 1980s PC industry. You entered the PC industry in the 1980s, but there was this time period of 1970s where people were building computers, but you weren't involved with it. I think you came in like 1979 or something like that.
I was working for Inc. magazine in 1979 when personal computers showed up, so I wrote about it and I started talking about it, but I was in Boston. And I didn't move to California until 1983. So I met a lot of the founders because Boston was a computer hub back then. Wouldn't know it anymore. But so I moved to California in 1983. And, Nolan Bushnell had already been doing this stuff for 10 years. So I thought I was, a latecomer. Of course, now from the perspective of 2025, it looks like I was an early comer. But the thing we're talking about is that what Atari did were dedicated game computers. And then they migrated to consoles, which are really dedicated game computers, but the ones you can buy yourself. And then they introduced computers, but that was after Nolan left Atari, which was in 1979.
But there was a computer that they used to play games with. That was the first personal computer, right?
Well, if you have a console, you have to stick a cartridge in it. That's not considered a computer, general purpose computer. But they did produce a general purpose computer, but it was after Nolan had left Atari under force after Atari merged with Warner Bros. And they didn't like the way he was operating the company, so they fired him.
And that's what I want to get into is like, that's the counterculture, right? He was part of the counterculture and it was a bunch of suits. And I think you're part of the counterculture. Growing up, I thought you might be a suit, but I think you are a counterculture. What do you think? Are you a suit?
So a lot of people thought I was a suit, although
interesting.
I only have one suit anymore.
Who thought you were a suit?
Well, when I moved to Silicon Valley in 1983, I moved as the editor-in-chief of InfoWorld, which had a small staff of like 10 or 12 people, editorial staff. And I rolled in like the East Coast guy telling everybody what to do. And that we had to, the practices they had were anathema to me. They'd write stories and they'd get the manuscripts. They stacked them up. When I arrived, there was like a stack of maybe 100 manuscripts that had been written but not published. And this is a weekly newspaper. So I'm sitting there going like, what? You don't care when you publish it? It's like, this is a newspaper, a news paper.
And so were all these guys that you started working with, were they part of the counterculture as well? Or they were just West Coast?
They're part of, well, I don't know. It depends. I don't know what your boundary is between living on the West Coast and being part of the counterculture. But the sort of three core writers, John Markoff, Paul Freiberger, and Michael Swain, who wrote most of the stories, they were all very counterculture. And this is the scene that I walked into, was they'd sit around on the floor and have meetings, and they wouldn't necessarily be wearing shoes or anything remotely related to work clothes. And so, and they would like talk to each other and they'd decide what to do. And that is a reflection of the fact that they'd fired the editor-in-chief, Maggie Cannon, because she really was not trained to run a publication, which I was. So they hired me to take her place and bring discipline, right? So that we were publishing stories as they happened rather than whenever somebody felt like putting them in the thing.
Wait. So this is really interesting territory that I've never got, because for the listeners just joining us, that basically this is a show that's about AI, but everything that led up to AI. And we've talked a lot in the early part of the show about how you basically showed up in this computer area and like started writing about it. And this is an interesting avenue into what it was like for these people who are just like writing stories and they're just publishing it. What, like they just would willy-nilly decide, okay, we're going to publish this now. Well, they would have to like go take it to a printer, right? How did that work from the
Well,
pack
we
of
had
manuals?
a page makeup system, computer system. So you'd have to decide when I say page makeup, of course, these are still manuscripts that are printed out. They're not even printed out, they're typed. So when I came in 83, within that next year, we adopted the ATEX system, which was what Computer World used back east, and I was used to using. I mean, we can go into the whole background of dedicated typesetting systems and how publications were published, because that was a huge transition going on at the same time. And but that's a little bit separate or orthogonal to what we're talking
Atari
about.
and well, but that I mean, I can connect it basically like 1970s. You just gave me a huge insight into the gaming computers were personal computers, but they were not general purpose computers, which is important for artificial general intelligence. And that's maybe a good way to think about an LLM is you like plug something into the LLM, a prompt into the LLM. But that's like one computer, and then you just talked about an ATEX system and so there's other things going on that eventually merged into the personal computer. So the ATEX system was before the personal computer. Can you talk more about that in relationship to what I just said about how it fits into
the ATEX system was a mini computer with multiple terminals.
Mini computer, interesting.
And the terminals had keyboards with them that were designed for professional editors and writers. So it had all the keyboard commands on it for, different formatting and stuff. Because there were no personal computers, no generalized personal computers until really the Apple II was the first one. And there were others like the Commodore PET originally, and then the Amiga and the Atari ST computers, which were later after Nolan left the company. So those computers were not designed to help you write and publish stuff. The big breakthrough was the Macintosh and the laser writer for that, but that wasn't until 1984. It will not be like 1984. Okay. But the laser writer actually came in 1985 or 86. And this was the revolution that Steve Jobs inserted underneath the idea of a general purpose computer, that this particular computer could handle fonts and layouts and could, do a bitmap display that showed what something would look like. WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get.
A bitmap display, that is not a GUI? A bitmap display is not a GUI?
No, that's a GUI. You can have, there are different ways of putting stuff on screens, and the two basic ways are bitmapped and vector graphic. There was a computer called vector graphic at that time that was more like a general purpose workstation, designed by the lady Lori Harp, who became Pat McGovern's wife. Pat McGovern was the founder of IDG, the publisher of Computer World, NIPWorld, etc. But she started out in the workstation business. So there was a brief moment where there were, workstations that looked an awful lot like computers, but really weren't designed that way. You have to intend to build a personal computer, personal generalized computer.
So what
principles?
So, and it seems like that generalized part is really important. And maybe we could connect this to the Atari thing, because as you mentioned, cartridge means it's not generalized. It brings a certain piece of software that you can play a game, and games were probably the first one. And so where did this idea that you needed a generalized computer? That's probably where the bicycle of the mind came in with Steve Jobs, right? That's where the counterculture. Why is the counterculture so obsessed with this? It's got to be general intelligence. It's got to be AGI. It's got to be all these things, because that all the countercultural people are doing that with AGI right now. But it's like a fake version of the 1970s.
You have to define counterculture, but this is all in the early 70s, early to mid 70s, which is right after flower
1968.
power. The 1960s. You know, there are a lot of other things going on, like the end of the Vietnam War in the early 70s. So there's a lot of other things influenced. When you use the term counterculture, it's a very broad term.
Well, I can go into it. I mean, and I've studied this a lot, and it's partly just growing up around you, growing up with all these stories of Steve Jobs, and partly just growing up in Silicon Valley and living in San Francisco and seeing this sort of shadow of 1968 where people are performatively trying to go back to that time, but in order to get better jobs, which was really funny because it's sort of like a performance because tech and the counterculture are all mixed up. And so my understanding of the counterculture is, like you said, Vietnam War. There was this giant, it was a big tent. We were all American. And then in the 1970s, it started burning flags, and they were going to war. And all of a sudden, the U.S. The U.S. government was like
60s.
Something that became evil. And so there was a counterculture. And growing up, it's like, I like this counterculture because I'm a bit counterculture. But then it went too far, right? And it started to destroy authority and all these different things. So there's counterculture. So you have the mainstream culture, you have the counterculture, and that's what Nolan Bushnell was doing. He's putting hot tubs in the office. It's like things that the people on the East Coast like you don't do.
We're horrified by the counterculture. The counter in counterculture is the counter to the military industrial.
Yeah, interesting.
Machine. Yeah. Right. So because of Vietnam, it became viewed that the military industrial part fed the military. The military went out and did stuff, and it was disconnected from us people. It was being run by Washington and the big companies. So the counterculture was a reaction to really what had happened after World War II, right? So the 50s and 60s, we were all supposed to have 2.5 children and a white picket fence, and we'd be taken care of, and the big companies would take care of you.
You got to wear the suit and go into the company every day, go to the office, you go play.
Or you were a member of a union, and you go to the factory every day, and get paid a lot, right?
Yeah.
Middle class economy was fed by
unions,
real labor jobs. So as young people going to college, high school and college through the 60s and early 70s, didn't want to sign up for that. And that's the counterculture. So mixed in with that was drugs and music, and hippies. And so when you say I was part of the counterculture, actually it was pretty late. My brother Ian was really in the counterculture and ended up moving to Nepal.
No, that's definitely true. I think you were right after it, but then I was also under the impression before we started doing the show, maybe a little bit before that most of the other PC people like Steve Jobs was also like, I imagine Steve Jobs was in 1968, but he was not. He was after, like you both sort of like entered the same.
That's why I observed it. He was a year older than me, and Gates was a year younger, either one way or the other. Maybe it's the other way around, but we were all in the same cohort. They started significant companies that became very important over time. Now as the observer watching them, but we were the same age.
But Steve Jobs was a hippie, but he was part of the counterculture, but he was not part of 1968. And Stewart Brand and Nolan Bushnell were.
Sort of. I mean, how old is Stewart Brand? Stewart Brand's actually older than Nolan.
He could have been in that. He was probably young. He was probably young in the 1968, but he was around it. He was enough to be influenced by it. He was with Ken Kesey. I found out only a few years ago that Ken Kesey and his band of merry punksters. Everything that was going on in San Francisco in the 1960s was also happening in Portola Valley. They would used to go and bring their vans and school buses and live in the mountains of Portola Valley, which are now filled with like executives and all this stuff.
I can't remember what the town is at the top, but yeah, that's true. And Stewart Brand hung out with Ken Kesey in the electric Kool-Aid acid test. So yeah, he would, and he's 86, by the way. I just looked it up. Nolan's like 81, 80, something like that, and I'm 73. So but it's a rolling thing over time, and so Stewart Brand is legitimately. It's interesting because he is 86, and my oldest brother Joe is 80, just turned 80, and Ian is 78, so we were all kind of a little bit past. But they had demonstrations at Dartmouth when Ian was there, and they took over the
interesting.
What the hell they call it, the administration building. Brother Joe never participated in that. He went to MIT.
I want to talk later. We'll save that for a personal call, but I want to understand later why Joe did not get into the consciousness revolution. Maybe we should bring him on the show again to get his perspective on this. But
that's he wouldn't have a perspective because he didn't participate.
But he was at MIT, so he like
was at MIT, which did not have a lot of flower power going on. Nerds coming around.
Okay.
They had a whole thing, which I'll have to try to remember, but hackers were born at MIT, not in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, interesting.
And they would go in the basement and hack on computers all night, trying to make them do things that they hadn't previously done.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so back on track to Atari, because we'll get into another question which relates to this question because it's Bill Gates. But before, I want to understand this relationship between the creative counterculture, because that's another part of the counterculture is they're very creative. Steve Jobs, very creative, like unique, singular person. Same with Nolan Bushnell. And then you have these suits come in, and like Warner Brothers or whatever the name is bought Atari, and then went to war with Nolan Bushnell.
$28 million. So it was like a fire sale.
Interesting.
It was a fire sale. So
wait, what was going on at that time?
Atari was already failing.
Yeah, okay. What was going on?
Warner Brothers, in its whatever its corporate wisdom was, said, "Well, there's this little company that has had smash hits and is based in Silicon Valley. We'll buy it and we'll bring discipline to it." But that was the kiss of death. You can't discipline it. You can't. I mean, it's funny because it goes on at Meow Wolf all the time. It's part of why I'm fascinated by it. But the suits, if they're strictly just suits, CFO types who are really worrying about making a business more efficient and making more money out of it, can't really understand the fundamentals of how a creative process leads to products, which is why media companies are better at managing that, and they learn how to be disciplined. But you don't take Warner Brothers and make them make computers, because that was a movie company at the time. Warner Brothers is a studio, and stuff that's happened later has been accumulated and aggregated in what's now known as Warner Discovery. There are many different stages between then and now, which is all about how you run a creative enterprise. But then you get into Disney and Paramount and a bunch of others. So that's a different business. So if a creative company tries to buy a hardware company, not going to work. None of the engineering discipline. I mean, even if you're having hot tubs and parties and stuff, you still have to have engineers who know how to write code and design hardware.
Well, but so the hot tubs and the parties, that was what Nolan used to find the right engineers, right? Because the engineers themselves were part of the counterculture, and they liked this idea of having hot tubs.
I don't think Nolan's going to watch our show, so I can probably say this, but there's what Nolan thought and what was real. two different things. So when he came on the show and he talked about the work hard, play hard culture that he built at Atari, there was an element of truth to that, but it was also incredibly wasteful. Made a lot of stuff that didn't work, and that's why Warner Brothers saw it as chaotic and couldn't let it keep going that way. Apple
interesting.
A little bit later, but Apple created an intense, focused culture thanks to Steve. But it started out being chaotic. The whole idea that the Macintosh division would fly a pirate flag over their building and sort of diss the rest of the company is fairly chaotic. And Scully wasn't able to manage that, or anybody else. Steve went off and learned his lesson and came back, and he figured out how to manage it. That's like very, very unusual.
Rare, singular. Like what I just got from what you just said is that Steve Jobs was in the middle of this chaos, got kicked out of his own company, went off into the darkness, into the forest, came back and learned how to become a suit himself. Is
after starting a company that failed?
Yeah,
failed into success because Apple bought it. It's a little side trip here. It's very interesting that Apple's talking to Intel about producing low-end chips. I don't know if you've read that. It's last
no, I have not. Wait, can you explain the significance of that?
Well, I can't really because I haven't figured out what it is. It's all rumor, and neither company has confirmed it. But Intel, try to do this quickly. Part of why the last CEO of Intel was fired is he tried to build a foundry business. Foundry is what TSMC does in Taiwan, and it freaks everybody out because it's so close to China. They were trying to build the ability to build chips to other people's specifications, so it's not just their own architecture. So the Intel architecture, all of the microprocessors inherited from like the 8502, whatever the hell it was, is what it is, and still supplies a lot of the microprocessors that run IBM compatible PCs, if you can even think that way. But Intel had failed to build chips for mobile phones. They tried to modify their own chips, and they took too much power and it drained the battery. So they were not successful in the mobile phone. So they eventually figured out they needed to build chips for other people using their architectures, and inevitably end up with the ARM architecture, which Apple and Amazon and others have adopted for all kinds of devices. I'm sitting here looking at a Macintosh. It's still not, I don't know, is that an ARM architecture? I guess it is. I guess they've successfully implemented an ARM architecture in a personal computer. Don't know that Windows has. That's something I have to probably think about or learn about. But the ARM architecture was invented back in the 80s in the UK. ARM originally stood for Advanced Research Machines. And it was a company in the UK, and it was a little company for a long time. And then people started adopting that architecture for mobile phones. It was a better microprocessor architecture for a phone with a big battery in it, and the screens other parts of the smartphone.
Anyway. And so Intel and Apple, so we'll take this back to the 1980s because the Apple part is really interesting. Well, actually, the Intel and the Apple part are both interesting. But what is the rumor that they're working together and they're doing what?
Yeah. So
Jobs
Apple
Act?
now has two chipsets, the A chips and the M chips. The M chips are in the Macintosh. The A chips are in the phone. So I don't know exactly what the difference is, but they're both based on the ARM architecture. And that's above my pay grade to tell you exactly what the difference between A and M is, but the rumor is that Intel is going to start making the low-end M chips. And they introduced I don't have all the numbers in my head, but I think the first one was the M1, and then they had the M2, and I bought a PowerBook that has the M5 in it. I bought this a month ago. This similar kind of numerical nomenclature for the iPhone. Right, so they introduced A1, or I don't know. I think there's an A12 out there now. So anyway, TSMC has been manufacturing the chips for Apple. And Intel has walked in and with this new guy, the Bhutan, who's the new CEO of Intel, and said and he made a decision not to get rid of the foundry. Everybody's freaked out.
Interesting.
Intel failed in the foundry business, and they should stick to their knitting and go back and just make chips that they're already successful with, which is like a prescription for ultimate failure. But the Bhutan's got quite a track record.
And he's got 10% of. Go for it.
So he's sitting there evaluating the fundamental strategy for the company and going, no, you should not get out of the foundry business.
Yeah,
It's how
interesting.
you build a significant company like TSMC. So the rumor is like in the last 48 hours that that Intel is talking to Apple about making chips for it, and it's couched in the sort of overall thing of Tim Cook gives to
Oh,
Trump,
of
and
course.
Trump wants manufacturing to come back to the U.S. And here's Liputin trying to get Apple to build its low-end chips in the
Well,
U.S. with Intel.
well, and I mean that makes sense, right? Because as we've talked about many times on this show, the reason why China is such a threat is because Apple went there and built all the supply chains, all the
Part
crazy
of it,
stuff
yeah.
around it. So it's like the institutional knowledge. In order to do the institutional knowledge, you need to build it, start somewhere, and so they're starting with these low end chips, and then with the same
Yeah.
thing China's trying to do. That's where try to get back that just dissolved base of manufacturing.
Let's call it distributed.
Hmm.
Dissolved sounds like it's going away.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah. So let's take that back to the 1980s and the 1990s because, of course, Intel has been around longer than Apple, and
Intel's
right,
original business was memory chips,
memory chips.
which is considered a commodity now. But at the time, memory chips were, the field of innovation. And there
Did
were a bunch of
Atari have a
memory.
memory chip? Did Atari have a memory chip?
No, Atari didn't make chips. Atari
No, but
bought
did they
chips.
did they did they did they buy
They had a
memory
little
chips
bit of
from
memory. I
Intel?
think it was like
Okay,
4K, something like
4K.
that. But
Yeah,
every 1K was a different chip. It was, I'm not
yeah,
saying it correctly, but
yeah,
you have to remember it was back then.
yeah. This is why I love doing this show is just because it's like I look at a computer now. The first time I saw a computer was when I was like 7 or 8 years old, probably at the house in Dale Avenue or something like that. And I see these computers, and I had never taken them apart. And there's just these units that, and like, there's a history there. It's almost like it's the same thing, and it's Western history. Like it was involved in invented by the British and the United States, and and people say, oh, Western civilization has no culture, blah blah blah. We used to build these giant cathedrals over the span of like 300 years, and everybody's saying we lost it. But no, we've been building cathedrals inside of chips, and they're all these just like really just crazy architectures
What
inside of chips that
What's the open source book? Cathedral.
oh Cathedral in the
You don't
Bazaar.
have to. Yeah,
Cathedral in the
in the
Bazaar
bazaar.
by Eric S. Raymond. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It was an interesting analogy. Anyway, uh, so this is why it's so important to understand technology,
Yeah.
because you have to understand the technology to know what it's capable of. It's become very
Hard.
theoretical now
Yeah.
in the age of AI because why is a GPU being used to build LLMs? That was kind of an orthogonal event.
Mm.
I
Mm.
thought of the word orthogonal, you may have noticed, but um,
Mm.
they were making chips for games because games had to put bits up on its screen really fast to
Mm.
satisfy the game player. And that was in a generalized personal computer. So they developed a graphics processing unit separate from the microprocessor. And just in order to put bits on the screen as fast as possible. And that defined game machines. That's why consoles really don't. There are consoles like the Xbox and stuff, but they don't have cartridges anymore. And they are really
Yeah.
generalized computers that are designed for a specific purpose. But GPUs somehow had the properties that were really good for processing LLMs. And that's like NVIDIA is 10 times as big as it was when it was just doing GPUs for game machines.
Okay. There's more juice inside the countercultural stuff in the 1980s with Apple and Steve Jobs, but I want to fast forward now into the future because you just hit on something really important, which I've studied since our last one, which is the TPU. And I believe in that time period, since the last time we did the show, NVIDIA lost a lot of stock because now Google is threatening them to build chips. Yeah, what did that mean?
So when you say lost a lot, go
Yeah,
look at its stock price. It's like, okay, it's
yeah,
lost. It was already way overvalued, and so it's
yeah,
moderated a little bit. It went down like 3% the day that was
yeah,
announced.
yeah.
Uh, People blow these terms up, so you have to be careful. It's still worth $5 trillion, pretty sure. So, I mean, I'll go look it up. I don't think I have it in my stock list, so maybe not. There was an interim thing that we're going to talk about, which was Bill Gates' idea that you could integrate the RDBMS into the file system for an operating system, which was a wonderful vision. Everybody bought into it. But it turns out you can't really make a computer with an RDBMS relational database management system because RDBMS require a lot of computing power to perform. And when you're using a computer, you don't want to have to have it go off and do a distributed data search before you get the result. Right? That's why file systems are small and efficient in an operating system. But Bill thought he could overcome the inherent limitations in having an RDBMS as the core of act as the file system for the operating system. And, a file system just retrieves a file from a hard disk and, keeps track of where everything is in the computer so that it can give you what you want. And an RDBMS frequently takes time to do a search because it's searching all kinds of data, very generalized system. And so they actually ended up using the technology they built. They used it as part of the Azure enterprise system on servers, and where microsecond performance is not as important. It's more important that it be accurate.
Oh.
And
so did you watch the YouTube video that I sent where the Collison brother from Stripe interviewed Satya Nadella?
Ooh, God, that was a while ago, I think.
That was a couple days ago. I sent you it, but that's how we got started on this Bill Gates question, which you just brought up, which we can go back to. Okay, so separate question put in your head, which is Bill Gates and the counterculture, whether he was a counterculture. I think I already know the answer.
Definitely not.
Yeah. Okay. So file system versus relational database management system. So in this interview between Satya and the guy from Stripe, Satya is basically pontificating about how Microsoft is now there in terms of Bill Gates' original vision of a personal computer in the 1980s, which is unstructured data, that I can use my computer with unstructured data and my giant enterprise that I'm paying Microsoft billions of dollars to help me organize my IT for. I can find that little file that, Joe Schmo in the IT department is trying to find. I can find that file, and me as the CEO can get complete visibility into my whole company. Is that Bill Gates' original envision in the 1980s? That's what he was trying to do?
Is that what Satya was claiming? I got to go back and listen to this. But so at some level, yes, but not because they made it happen. It's kind of normal, right? So what are the things that are going to happen anyway? You have to distinguish between what are the things that are going to happen anyway. It doesn't matter whether you do it, and what do you do that makes it different.
Interesting.
And Microsoft's benefited the same thing everybody else has benefited from, which is we have incredibly fast broadband networks. Me being on a 14-hour flight with Starlink means I have as fast access to everything that's available on the internet as I do at home. That's a general trend that's been going on and continues to go on. Indeed, the addition of satellites as part of the network expands the capacity of the network tremendously. So all that stuff's going on anyway. It's like a motivation for the entire computer industry to make everything faster, cheaper, smarter. So now, so that vision that Bill had now exists inside of Azure, which has a relational database management system for finding corporate data anywhere in the network.
Okay.
It still requires a certain level of programming expertise, and this is what Microsoft can't escape, that its original customers were not IT administrators. They were programmers, basic programmers.
Yeah.
They started with basic. That was what the company started with, and companies always have this thing of, what did they start with? What are they good at? What's their mentality and culture? So Microsoft thinks organizationally like a programmer, not like an IT guy, not like a consumer, not like,
So, okay, back to the counterculture. How did Steve Jobs think as a designer, as a hippie?
as an individual, a person who wants to
As an
use a computer
individual.
for his own
I love it.
purposes. And yeah, I mean, it's built into Apple's culture, right? It's not something that's questioned. In fact, they just fired a bunch of salespeople in their enterprise division because they sit there and go, well, what are these guys doing? They're all talking about these IT people, and that's not what we do.
Yeah.
So if they want to buy computers, but let them go to the Apple store.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, this is a really good point. That individual piece, that's a key part of the counterculture, because the 1960s and the 1970s was all about this sort of Enlightenment philosophical tradition where they're basically like rebelling against the king, rebelling against authority, and we have this
The
enlightened U.S.
machine,
government. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
the military industrial machine,
yeah,
right? So Microsoft is now the only approved operating system for the CIA
yeah,
and the NSA,
yeah,
and the federal government
yeah.
does not actually endorse using Google, Android, or other
Mm.
elements of their cloud system. Even though most people say that Google's is cleaner and more secure than Microsoft, it's like,
How does that work for the phone? Because Microsoft doesn't have a phone that people use, right? And the government people need
ah,
phones.
they even bought Nokia at one point,
Oh, interesting.
then sold it off. That was Bomber bought it, and Satya sold it off. Um, you don't have a phone business by buying a phone company. You buy a legacy, whatever Nokia was. So yeah, Motorola and Nokia are no longer phone makers. I guess Motorola still makes phones, maybe. I don't think I've ever seen one, but
But how
recently.
did Microsoft keep its government contracts knowing that everybody's probably on an iPhone?
Because the government's as slow as Microsoft is. Basically, Microsoft slowed itself down to
Yeah,
match the government
yeah,
and big companies. I mean, they're dominant. Azure is the dominant enterprise computing system. Amazon's close second because they went through developers. They got developers to buy Amazon Web Services, but Amazon Web Services is now a matched set in terms of functionality for Azure. And Google has struggled with its cloud system because it didn't really understand how to do that. So it has a cloud business, but a lot of the people that use the Google Cloud are technical companies like, Niantic, which was spun out of Google. But so, if you go off into the enterprise business, which I'm not really strong at because I'm not as interested in that,
because
there's a whole different ecosystem.
you were always interested in the individual, like Steve
Yeah.
Jobs, in this
Yeah,
in this
like
sort
I
of.
was blown away the first time I set up an Apple II and went, holy crap, I have a whole computer here. Wonder how to use it.
So that seems really important, and it makes me think you are more counterculture than you are suit, because that's the individual,
Oh,
right?
definitely. I mean,
Yeah,
what I'm wearing.
yeah.
I'm not a not a corporate dude.
Mm-hmm.
As it's part of my life story. Been fired 3 times, didn't do so well in school. I'm like, that's not my gig.
Mm.
Um,
So I want to talk about how, because maybe I got it from you, maybe I've developed it in my experiences with the corporate world, but there's this sense that they're just extracting. They're not actually contributing. You use the word efficiency, which I liked. Like the CFO comes in and they're worried about efficiency, but there is also this sense that like they can't do it themselves. They can't create. They can't sit with that chaos of creation. No, yeah. What's going on?
that's not accurate. Um, so any large company has many different pieces to it,
Oh,
right? It's a
interesting.
matter of who's running it and what the mentality is. But like Post-it notes, you know who made them?
No.
It's the glue company, Scotch brand, or the hell is it? Um, and they're run in such a way that this guy was trying to figure out how to put notes on a wall and not have it stick forever to the wall, right? To be able to take it off and put it back. So they developed a glue that could be reused. And so Post-it notes ended up being a multi-billion-dollar business for that company. So inside a large company, they created an innovation, and there's plenty of examples of this. So
Yeah.
it's really more
Yeah.
a matter of how companies are run, and great companies regenerate themselves. Satya Nadella is actually a pretty good example of that. He took over from Ballmer, and kind of studied. Of course, he'd been working there his whole life, but he studied Microsoft and said, this is what we're going to focus on. This is what we're good at. And he has been right. And then AI came along and regenerated the whole thing. So there's plenty of companies, big companies, that operate in an agile manner with and focus on who their customers are and what they're doing.
Yeah, interesting.
So you can't just kind of line out every big company just
So
because you don't like working for an organization.
Efficiency in a way is creative. There is a way to do it.
It's a balance. I mean, there's a yin and a yang in every company. It's like you have to know who your customers are, right? I listened to this interview, which I can't remember if I mentioned to you, with a guy named Matt Bromberg, who has become the turnaround guy for the video game business. And he started with a single game where he took them, they'd spent $300 billion a year building this game and they weren't getting anywhere. And he went in and turned it around. Then he went to Zynga, I think it was. And then he went to somewhere else. Now he's running Unity, which is the game engine, the dominant game engine, right? They've made a massive mistake with the last CEO and really hurt the business. So he had to go in and turn it around. You listen to him, right? And this is true for anybody who's really good at turning a company around. You have to start with who the customer is. Who's the customer? Because they're the ones buying your stuff, right? You have to go back to that always. That was pretty interesting because they created, the last CEO didn't really understand the problem, so he changed the way the product was priced and pissed everybody off. So this guy came back and said, okay, well, we can stop doing that. And then they figured out a kind of twist on it. So the company is growing and making more money. He solved the problem, but not by pissing off the customers.
This gets to interesting territory, back to that individual versus the individual versus the enterprise, because even an enterprise is made up of individuals, but they don't think as an individuals. It's not the same thing as a consumer, because the consumer is has no ties, whereas enterprises have these large, sort of king-like politics.
It's a mix of both things. They're all still people, right? They still have their lives and their things that they're interested in, but their, personality, mentality, situation leads them to believe in the corporate objective as well as their own personal objectives, and the organization manages that. I mean, if you're running a company, you have to pay attention to what your employees want. Don't ever get my brother Andy.
Yeah, interesting, because it's all people. It's like
he's into this thing of companies succeed when they satisfy their employees, because happy employees serve the customer better, make better products, right? The employee is really at the core of it. And, that's kind of like, that's, whatever. You still have to make your shareholders.
It's different. There's a meme that says it's turtles all the way down. It's actually not a meme. It's like a myth from one tribe or something like that, where they're talking about their universal creative myth. And they're like, well, what's underneath that turtle? Oh, it's another turtle. What's holding up the earth? A turtle. Well, what's underneath the turtle? Another turtle. What's underneath the turtle? So it's just turtles all the way down. It's like people all the way down. And this is where AI gets really interesting, where it's where now we have something else that is intelligent. I think maybe knowledgeable is a better way I would like to turn it, sort of where it's knowledgeable and can take a little bit of action, but you need to watch that action. Oh man, I have to get in. We have to talk about this. So Trump administration just let the OpenAI, Gemini, and Anthropic get access to confidential lab data from the Department of Energy for all the 17 national different laboratories. And they're going to do a closed loop trying to automate science with no humans in the loop. So they're basically giving these companies access to private data. I imagine that there's going to be some backroom dealings. I did this crazy research. Do you know about this?
I got glancing away. It didn't catch my interest, but I read about it. I don't know enough about it to know exactly what it is.
You know about the labs, right? You know about the 17 national labs?
Of course. We have two of them here in Mexico.
and those ones are all on nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, all of these types of different things. They've got biology data sets. Trump is accurately realizing that China has the best data set in the world, including just like tons of video, all the surveillance they've been doing has created the perfect LLM data set. The US needs now to figure out how to get a good data set. And so they're starting with these 17 national labs, and they're going to try to automate the production of science. But the crazy thing is that knowing this technology, knowing the LLMs, you need a human in the loop. I cannot let this thing go run on its own without me knowing where to verify and verify. This is what makes engineers so good with this technology is they already know what to verify. They can just put the nail in the hammer exactly where it goes. But these guys are trying to do it with science, which means either that they have really good technology that they're not talking to us about that can already do closed loop automation, or they're making a horrible, horrible decision about trying to automate the entire scientific process with fusion and all these other crazy things.
November 25, signed an executive order creating the Genesis mission.
Yeah, Genesis is also another crazy thing to talk about.
Sweeping effort to build a unified AI-driven research platform leveraging federal scientific data sets stored at the 17 national labs. Yeah, it kind of who's doing what is what's always interesting to me. You know, David Sachs is the AI czar for the U.S. federal government. Also does the all-in
podcast. Yep.
Podcast.
Yeah.
And he's a smart guy. Not sure how much smarter he is than any one other type of person, you know, than Jeffrey Hinton or Jan LeCun or some of the other major AI people. I don't think he's an AI specialist per se. So I'm always interested when the government announces something and who the hell's going to actually do it.
Yeah, interesting.
Some guy buried in a lab and, you know, at one of the labs. So intended to integrate not just data sets, but also supercomputing and AI resources at national labs.
Yeah.
Well,
interesting. So that's a way it probably came from Sam Altman in his eternal struggle to get more compute for the last 10 minutes. We can talk about this is because that supercomputer part you just talked about is really important because they have a bunch of supercomputers at these labs, which are underutilized, partly because it's confidential data. And so there's some stuff going on there. And so I imagine Altman in his internal quest to get more compute to try to front run the fact that I'm sure he was aware of for these past 2 years, which is that Google has now entered the picture and their product sense is not as good as OpenAI. OpenAI is definitely the leader in terms of the productization of LLMs. But they now have enough compute where I can make images, I can make videos, I can do coding, I can use anti-gravity. Like Google has now entered the picture in this really, really important way, and they are going to put the screws on OpenAI. What do you think?
If Google has achieved a higher level of competitive status vis-a-vis OpenAI, it's not because they targeted OpenAI. They designed their own strategy.
What do you mean?
That's why it's so hard to respond to such a strategic move, because you can't get at why they're doing it in the first place. You know, Google recognizes it as essentially unlimited access to cash. Anyway, it also has extraordinary talent, and once it marshals that talent, it can be much more responsive. It's perceived that OpenAI does not have a strategy; that they're just throwing shit against the wall. So I actually wouldn't characterize them as being better at product development. You know, they have ChatGPT and they have Sora, and they have, you know, Sora is a social network, not a video generator. It's like they're making guesses. They're doing the thing with Johnny Ive. They got all these efforts, all of which seem to be not very well coordinated, but each of which is interesting. Whereas Google's like, yeah, wow, they're taking advantage of their search history. I just figured out that I don't get Gemini for free in the browser, even though I'm using Chrome. I have to go to gemini.google.com to get Gemini. And because I look for an app, there's no app on the Mac, there is on the iPhone. So I had to figure out So why not? Why do I have to type gemini.google.com? Why don't they give me an app? And I'm sure there's a reason for it. There's
I
some
think
kind of Chrome
anti-gravity.
extension.
Well, I think anti-gravity is the app. So, and it's not for you. It's for the whole new generation of people who got used to Cursor or Windsurf, and it's a name to get the IDE, a consumer IDE, basically. So, anti-gravity is
It's their Claude or whatever it is, Cursor.
it's their Cursor, yeah, and that's the key differentiation, because I was expecting them to drop Gemini 3 inside the terminal command line, which is what all the programmers are using. I'm tracking the programmers, as I learned from you, which is like, what are they doing? Where are they at the edge? And I go use those tools, and now it's really cool because I can build applications. So I was expecting them to enter that fray against OpenAI, who copied Claude code, but instead they went after Cursor. So they've dropped anti-gravity, which is basically an IDE with an agentic architecture, which is really important. It means that they've basically, like Cursor was starting to add agents, those terminal command line agents that I was talking about, those are agents, but they've done it in a comprehensive way. And all the programmers in our AI Whisperers chat are basically saying that it's really important for them. But there's also, as you just said, product issues. There's like the fact that they don't have Gemini on app, the fact that you can't do all these different things. So there are product issues. And what you said about OpenAI made me think that sounds like OpenAI, or that OpenAI now sounds like Google in 2001, 2002, which is just kind of like running into this giant thing, which took off much bigger than they expected. Do you think that that's a fair comparison?
I don't think, I wouldn't put it that way, but I think it's true. It's not that OpenAI has suddenly encountered an unknown thing, right? Because they themselves made it known that a chatbot could perform as they have done so well with ChatGPT. But in order to compete in a fast-moving environment that's highly technical, you have to know where you're headed. You have to know where you're headed. Otherwise, you make mistakes.
Yeah, interesting.
And right now, Anthropic is viewed as making a mistake because it copied pirated books. They just lost the first instance in that legal suit, which I know because I talked to my sister, and she's right on top of it. She has 4 books in there that they copied and put into their LLM. So, I mean, that's a judge's decision that they were basically doing fair use on the books by copying it, but they shouldn't have copied pirated books. They should have gone to the source. And so it's a small loss for Anthropic, but it's not trending in the right way. So why didn't Dario Amodei know that in advance, that they couldn't fake it, that they had to deal with it directly? That's a strategic misinterpretation, right? That he didn't know. So strategy really depends on you knowing what all the issues are and making the right decisions. And it looks like Sundar Pichai figured it out 3 years ago. And he kind of knew that ChatGPT was coming, and he knew that there would be a big blow up around that, and it would. So he stayed calm, and he said, "This is what we had to do. We had to do this and that, and put it all together, and blah blah blah." Have you noticed? I think I sent that to you, that Perplexity dropped by 60%. The number of searches that were being done. I'm going like, well, glad I don't own stock in Perplexity, because it seems like they're in a defenseless position. That's. I can't remember that guy's name, but this is what's going on. This is what always goes on. He who understands the problem better than anybody else and has the resources to do something about it ends up winning.
That's a really interesting point, because it's not only knowledge, it's also the resources.
And the internal fortitude to believe in yourself, right? To believe your own choices, which, if they turn out to be wrong, could be a problem. But Sundar is looking pretty good right now. Kind of Steve Jobsian in his ability to perceive, where things are headed. Even Microsoft. Give me Microsoft CEO. Why am I having a senior moment?
Satya.
Yeah, Satya Nadella made a bet on OpenAI, and he looks like he made the bet knowing that it would be a temporary thing, right? And then as quickly as he could, tried to figure out how to get around OpenAI and protect himself from this crazy dude. So to some level, it's Satya versus Sundar.
Yeah, interesting. Oh man, there's a great quip that Satya made against Sam Altman in that episode I was talking about. I can't remember the specific quip, but anybody listening or you yourself, I think it would be fun for you to go listen to.
I don't think he actually named Sam. I think I know what you're talking about.
He
didn't name him, but
yeah. And it's quite like you could feel it, the emotional resonance of it afterwards is like, oh man, that guy has had some interesting run-ins with Sam Altman. That seems like a good place to end it. So yeah, anything else you want to share on this topic?
No, I just say I could be wrong, right? That it's Google versus Microsoft at this point, because it's not really versus. Microsoft's doing the enterprise, which Google's always been weak in, but Google is getting the hearts and minds of the programmers, people who know how to manage.
It's a good topic AI. For the next one, is because Google did release a suite of products that my generation definitely uses more than Microsoft, but they're still not.
The banana?
Nano Banana. That's Nano Banana, which is very good.
Nano Banana. I have to get that head in my head.
Yeah.
They offered. I just went to Gemini.google.com and it offered me up Nano Banana, and I'm going like, well, what's that? And what do I
it's for the Zoomers. It's for the Zoomers. So Nano Banana, really, I'll share an insight I got from one of my developer friends, which is that the real unlock for Nano Banana is not the artistic art, it's the technical specifications. So now I can actually go and build technical designs and do all these sort of things that are like really important for actually manufacturing or coding.
Yeah, I saw a post about this where it did the prompt was turn this into a presentation a professor would do on a whiteboard.
Yep.
It did it. It made the whole chart just like a professor would. Yep. Somebody needs to go check that and make sure it's right. But
it's pretty good. I've been checking it.
I kind of get it. And part of Nano Banana is that it will work with images. And so you can give it an image and tell it what to do, as opposed to telling it what to do to create an image, which is an interesting flip.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Tune in next week.